stop and pay a toll? The head of the Iranian parliament's construction committee has announced that the draft bill on the Strait of Hormuz is nearing completion, according to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps affiliated news agency, Fars news agency of Iran. Now, the proposal would ban Israeli-linked ships, restrict states which Iran deemed hostile, and impose fees that's denominated in the Iranian currency, the rial. Meanwhile, on April the 19th, Ismail Bagaei, the spokesperson for the Iranian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, sharply criticized European calls for quote-unquote unconditional transit passage in the Strait of Hormuz, saying that such principles sailed the moment the U.S. and Israeli aggression brought U.S. military assets into the strait's backyard. So what is going to be the situation in the Strait of Hormuz? What kind of fees will be collected and how will it be implemented? And what's on the mind of the Iranian delegation as to whether or not and when to go to the next round of talks with their U.S. counterpart? Welcome to a special edition of The Point with me, LiuXin, coming to you from Central China's Henan province. I'm pleased to be joined from Tehran by Syed Mohammad Marandi, professor of English literature and Orientalism at the University of Tehran, who was involved in the previous round of negotiations in Islamabad. From Northwest China's Shanxi province, Professor Wang Jing, director of the Center for Strategic Studies at Northwest University of China, and from Stockholm, Sweden, by Hussein Askari, vice chairperson of the Belt and Road Institute in Sweden. Gentlemen, welcome to The Point. So, Professor Marandi, let me go to you. As to the fees, as to the toll in terms of the passage through the Strait of Hormuz, help us understand what exactly is going to happen to the ships. We understand a lot of ships were stranded. Now, according to this draft bill from the Iranian parliament, passages may start, but what kind of ships will be banned? What kind of ships will be restricted? What kind of ships will be allowed? And under what kind of conditions? Professor Marandi, help us understand.
My understanding is that restrictions will be only linked to ships belonging to hostile forces, and that all other ships will be able to move back and forth. But there will be a fee that will have to be paid to the Iranian government in order for a ship to pass through. Now, the amount of money that would be paid has not been declared. It hasn't been stated what differences there will be with regards to different types of ships or the countries that own those ships. None of those details have been made public. The most important thing is that the Iranians are determined to get reparations from those countries that were involved in the war against Iran and who will probably be involved in any future conflict as well. The countries in the Persian Gulf that host American bases, they are considered by Iranians to be partners in crime, and they have the blood of thousands of Iranians on their hands, and therefore they will have to pay reparations. In addition to that, the Iranians want to make sure that in future the United States doesn't use the Persian Gulf again as a base or a center from which it can assault Iran. And while Iran does not really have any concern about the relationship that countries in the Persian Gulf have with the Americans or the Europeans, they do not want that relationship to be one where Iranian assets can be attacked or Iranian civilians can be killed.
What's the ultimate end game that Iran has in mind in terms of restricting the transit passages into the Strait of Hormuz? For instance, how long will the fees last? And to what will be the condition for Iran to say, okay, now we're fine that ships can pass freely again?
Well, again, it's not clear if all countries or all companies will pay the same sort of fee, or uh, uh, what conditions there are for paying a fee. What is important for the Iranians is that the Strait of Hormuz be controlled in a way so that in future, in the long term, the future of Iran is secured. And also, the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Kuwaitis, the Bahrainis, and the Qataris have caused great harm to the Iranian people. And the damage done to our country is enormous. And they are fully complicit in these crimes. Without these countries, the United States would not have been able to launch this war. The United States need these countries. They need their bases in these countries. They need the airspace of these countries. They need the military bases of these own countries. They're using, for example, Saudi air bases against Iran.
I see. So Iran is using the restrictions in the Strait of Hormuz as a response, or as some kind of bargaining chip, I don't know, pressure tool to try to contain the situation. Professor Wang Jing, how do you look at what is going on in this concerning the Strait of Hormuz, especially given the very confusing back and forth over the past few days that we have seen different information coming out of the United States, and then, of course, rebuttals coming from Iran. So help us understand exactly what has been going on. We understand that Iran was restricting passage of cargo ships through the Strait of Hormuz. But then, because of the collapse of the talks in Islamabad, the United States imposed a naval blockade. But then President Trump also thanked Iran for reopening the strait. But then, Iran is reimposing the restriction over the Hormuz. Exactly what is going on?
Oh, well, I think it's a very sensitive topic, particularly that you mentioned the status of the Hormuz, what will be to happen next. Let's be frank, we have to say that from my personal point of view that the page of the free passage of the Hormuz Strait has already passed. A new page has already arrived. It means that all the ships, no matter the ships are coming from where, or no matter the ships would come to, if the ships would go through Hormuz Strait, it has to be reported to Iran. And it also has to gain the agreement of Iranian authority, particularly Iranian's Islamic Republic, Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps. And also, I think, according to the very latest movements of Iranian's parliament, that some fees would be collected for these ships, and also some fees would be collected by the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps over these ships. So it means that we're actually looking at the arrival of the new era of the Hormuz Strait. And also, meanwhile, we cannot forget that it's not only that Iran is trying to manage the Hormuz Strait, it's also United States is trying to influence the Strait of Hormuz, because we know that the United States now is also organizing and gathering the military forces, naval forces outside of the Hormuz Strait, and trying to intercept the ships with the connections to Iran, and to hope to impose new pressure against Iran to make Iran make concessions on the negotiation table with the United States according to United States terms. So that's why I think, of course, on the one hand, now Hormuz Strait become the bargaining chips between United States and Iran, and everybody hopes to use it to make the other side to make concessions. But also, I think on the other hand, as we repeatedly stress that now the Hormuz Strait is now faces a new turning point. It means that it would not be of the area of free passage. It would become the area full of, I think, the efforts of trying to be, for example, to be monitored, trying to be to make it to be supervised, and trying to make the area full of the control. So that's why I think it means more uncertainties, because when Iran or United States is trying to impose new voices over the Strait of Hormuz, it means that we cannot forget the Gulf Arab states. They were not satisfied. The other neighboring countries, they will not be satisfied. So that's why it would lead to new uncertainties and the crisis in this region.
Mr. Askari, how do you understand the situation? Will there be will ships, for instance, from China, from Russia, from other countries which who are friendly to Iran or hold a neutral position, will they also be charged as well? First of all, what is your understanding? And secondly, who's really blocking the strait? The United States is talking about a naval blockade against Iranian ships. So can Iranian cargo ships go in and out, through the strait freely as we speak?
Yeah, well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be on your show, and also with your esteemed guests. One thing we have to remember why we have this situation is because the United States and Israel launched an unprovoked illegal war against a sovereign nation of Iran while negotiations were going on. There's nothing Iran has done wrong in this situation. It has reacted to protect its sovereignty and its people and its rights. And therefore, this Strait of Hormuz is a natural reaction by Iran to this aggression. Now, if we talk about, in terms of, we have to differentiate between tactics and long-term strategies. When it comes to the legal status of the Strait of Hormuz, and this will be of concern for Iran's friends too, like China and other nations, is that according to the United Nations Convention of the Laws of the Seas, which was convened in 1982, we had a similar crisis when my native country, Iraq, was at war with Professor Marandi's home country, Iran, and there was similar problems in the whole region. So it's to identify what is the legal status of the Strait of Hormuz, but also other straits like the Bab el-Mandeb, the Malacca Strait, the Bering Strait, and the Gibraltar Strait, because it's not under complete Iranian sovereign territories, because it's shared by Oman and Iran. And this makes it an international passage, an international strait where no country has the right to impose fees or block the passage of ships. Now, the United States never signed that convention, of course, but this is in time of peace. In time of war, this becomes a belligerent strait, which means that the nation, whether Oman or Iran, feels that the usage of this strait harms its national security, or it's used for war against its people or its territories, then Iran has the right to block that strait. It's called, Iran previously had, it's called the innocent passage, which people who don't harm us are free to pass, even without fees, without anything. Now, this is a different situation now. I believe that the Iranians are using this as a bargaining chip because the United States also imposes a blockade, which is quite funny because, the United States want to open the strait by blocking the strait, which is like tantamount to chopping off your leg in order to prevent shooting your foot, which is very, very strange, a tactic. One reason I believe that the negotiations will continue in Pakistan, there are two reasons. One is that these are serious negotiations. One is that the resistance and the resilience of Iran, the Iranian people and leadership in this war, have created realities that the United States can no longer ignore. Nobody trusts the United States. Nobody trusts Israel, the spoiler, who wishes to have perpetual wars forever. But there are new realities created by Iran, which forces the United States to take certain issues into consideration and try to get a peaceful settlement, diplomatic settlement. The other reason I believe the Pakistan negotiations are serious is that because they are conducted, not like previous discussions, with support of China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Turkey, and many other countries, which tells me that there might be some guarantees involved in this picture. And the Iranians would never, it's not typical Iranian to punish everybody just because they are angry or because they want to have reparations. I understand that the Gulf countries were used as basis to attack Iran. This even goes back to the Iran-Iraq war. These countries supported Iraq, and the United States did that to attack Iran. But I think there is need for thinking about a new security architecture for everybody, and that the Gulf should not be like a Berlin Wall separating Iran from these countries. The world will change. The world has changed, and China has played a very important role in bridging this Gulf in previous years when it both had signed comprehensive strategic agreements with Saudi Arabia, but also with Iran. And then under President Raisi brought Saudi Arabia and Iran together to renormalize. And so there's a long-term idea, strategy for peace through economic development, which should become supreme. I understand that under the current situation, the tension is very high, emotions are very high, but I think there's a future for all these nations to live together. And I think the Chinese, the Russians, and everyone is very, very concerned about that.
Professor Marandi, if you want to add something, or if there is something you do not agree with from what was said by the previous two guests just now, please go ahead. But I want to ask you about your assessment of the possibility in the next days of a second round, and under what circumstances would Iranian delegation say, okay, they're at least sincere enough, serious enough that we can give it another try?
Yes, well, at the moment, in general, there's a consensus in Iran that speaking with the United States will bear no fruit. And unless there is a shift in U.S. policy that is substantial, I think that the Iranians are going to continue preparing for war. The Iranians do not trust the Americans even to abide by the ceasefire itself. One thing that I should clarify, and that is that Iran it has not closed the Strait of Hormuz right now without reason. There was an agreement between Iran and the United States for a ceasefire 11 days ago, roughly. And that ceasefire was to include Lebanon. And the Americans agreed to that. And the Pakistani prime minister stressed that. Subsequently, Netanyahu began carpet bombing Beirut and other cities and slaughtering large numbers of civilians in order to wreck the ceasefire. And the Iranians said, if that is the case, then we will not abide by our commitments in the ceasefire. And that was to increase the number of ships that can pass through the Strait of Hormuz. The Iraqi government was allowed, the Iranians themselves were using the strait, but the 5 countries that hosted U.S. bases, there were restrictions on their shipping. But in accordance with the agreement, larger numbers of ships were to be allowed to pass through. But since the Israeli regime wrecked the ceasefire, the Iranians said, we won't allow those extra ships to pass through. Ultimately, when Netanyahu was forced to accept the ceasefire a couple of days ago, the Iranians then said, we will abide by our commitments and we will allow that extra shipping to go through the strait. But after Iran made that statement, Trump said that he will not remove his siege on Iranian ports, which is a violation of the agreement too, the ceasefire agreement. So Iran said before it was Israel, the Israeli regime that was violating the agreement, and we refused to allow these extra ships to go through. Now the Americans themselves are violating it, and therefore we will not allow those extra ships to go through. And right now, until the Americans remove the siege, the Iranians say that we will continue with this policy.
So if the United States decide to force Iran to go to the negotiation in Islamabad by bombs, is that going to create the opposite effect? I mean, basically, I'm asking you to send a direct message, let's say, to policymakers in Washington.
Yes, that would mean that Iran will go to war. And we have already been at war for 40 days with the United States and its proxies and its allies, and they failed. And if they continue this war, they will fail again. The only thing that they will do is that they will be pushing the global economy towards not just recession, but depression, because the damage that is being done to the global economy is enormous. And the problem really, though, in the belief of people in Iran, is the Israeli regime. It is believed that the United States and even Trump wants an off-ramp. And there are reasons why they believe this. But the Israeli regime, the Zionist lobby in the United States, refuses to allow that to happen. And there's also evidence, public evidence of this. Joe Kent, who was the head of counterintelligence in the United States until recently, right, a Trump appointee, in his resignation letter said that Iran is not developing a nuclear weapon, that Iran's not a threat to the United States. But most importantly for our discussion is that he said this war is because of the Israeli regime and the Zionist lobby in the United States. It is because of them that we're at war with Iran. And so by extension, it's one can state very clearly, and based on Iranian evidence, the continued tensions and the possibility for renewal of war will be are because of the Israeli regime and the Zionist lobby in the United States.
Finally, what is your reaction to people who are saying Iran is breaking international law by restricting unconditional transit passage through the Strait of Hormuz? For instance, the Vice President of the European Commission, Kaja Kallas, has called for such a unconditional transit passage, stressing that international waterways must remain open and free of charge.
Well, I think she should have said something when the United States invaded Iran and when they carried out the slaughter of 168 children on day one in the first wave of strikes. And she never mentioned anything about those children. And she also supported the 12-day war when the Americans and the Israelis launched a blitzkrieg attack on the country. So in Iran, her words carry no weight whatsoever. What Iran is doing is that it is controlling the Strait of Hormuz because countries inside the Persian Gulf, a number of countries, are hostile to the country. They are partners in war. But as I said, for example, Iraq is not a part of this restriction. Right now, of course, because of the blockade, there is a full closure. But the U.S. blockade aside, there are no restrictions on Iraqi ships. And as you know, Chinese ships and Russian ships have been passing back and forth. So these countries, their sin is that they're partners in crime, including the murder of those 168 little girls in the city of Minab, something for which none of them have ever apologized for. And the United States continues to refuse to take responsibility for their murder.
Professor Wang Jing, I want to come back to you.
For example, if you're talking about the Iran nuclear issues, from Iran's perspective, they believe that they have the legal rights to continue to develop their nuclear capabilities without the intervention from the United States. But then from United States behavior, they still have the so-called hegemonic thinking way and believe that they could intervene the Iran's high-level uranium and as well as Iranian's nuclear capabilities. And also, if we're looking at the so-called the Hormuz Strait, two countries, as we just could hear very clearly, that the two countries have clearly different understandings over the status of Hormuz and what should be the future state of the Hormuz Strait. And also, if we're talking about the regional security situation, actually, they have the United States and Iran, they have very conflicting ideas. From Iran's perspective, they believe that the United States should withdraw parts of the region from the Middle East, but also from United States perspective, or even some of regional allies, let's be frank, for example, Saudis and the Bahrains, they still have some kind of the distrust towards Iran. So that's why it's very difficult for United States to withdraw from the military bases in this region within the short term. And also last but not least, that is that the sanctions. And these sanctions, economic development, as well as economic reconstruction process, also the two countries had a very deeply gap between each other. So that's why I don't think the dialogue would lead to any conclusion. And maybe, and even that I doubt, very highly doubt, whether or not the Islamabad peace for a dialogue would continue. So that's why maybe they will call it the end of the so-called the cold peace, rather than the warm peace, means that the ceasefire will continue, but there will be no guarantee of the so-called agreement.
All right, that's your take. Mr. Askari, what is your prediction of what's going to happen?
Yeah, no, I think because of it's not only the world economy is suffering, but because the whole transatlantic financial and banking system is also a huge bubble, which will go together with this economic crisis, which is created because of the oil crisis. So there's a huge problem in the Western financial and banking system, which can be triggered by the continuation of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz and the oil crisis. But I think at the same time that there will be pressure from, as I said, that the Pakistan negotiations are backed by China, Russia, and many other countries, including countries in the Gulf, who do want a solution, that this old model of American umbrella, American intervention should end, but also that there should be a new architecture. But everything will be based on going back to either the JCPOA or an advanced type of a nuclear agreement where Iran's rights are preserved, sanctions are lifted, and economic cooperation comes back to this region as envisioned in the Belt and Road Initiative and other initiatives, where these nations can live together, because the old model of these countries selling oil and buying weapons and luxury goods is gone. These countries want to industrialize, they want to develop, but they are still under an old umbrella. That umbrella is burned now. They have to look for a new model of coexistence with Iran, but also within the new international order, which is dominated by the global South.
For the time being, it also very much depends on what the United States or President Trump wants and what he's willing to accept. So, Professor Marandi, I'm just going to squeeze in this one quick question and try to keep it short. On what basis are the two sides negotiating? Is it on the deal that was left off, that was mediated by Oman before the war started?
No, the only reason why Iran is bothering to negotiate in the first place is that Trump agreed to the Iranian 10-point peace plan as the basis upon which negotiations take place. And although he has refused to abide by that, but that is the U.S. commitment, and that is the basis for any talks by Iran. The Americans have lost this war, and if they fight Iran again, they will lose again, and it will only make things worse for the United States. And there's no reason why Iran should appease Trump, and Iran will not appease Trump.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Hopefully, some kind of a political settlement will be reached. Some settlement that will last, that will be committed, that will be honored by both sides. We'll keep a closer watch on the situation. Meanwhile, many thanks to my guests, Syed Mohammad Marandi from the University of Tehran, Professor Wang Jing from Northwest University of China, and Hussein Askari from the Belt and Road Institute in Sweden. And with that, we come to the end of this very special edition of The Point with me, LiuXin, coming to you from central China's Henan province. As usual, you can follow me on Facebook and X and YouTube using the handle LiuXin in Beijing. On behalf of the whole team, thank you for watching. You've got The Point.